Let me tell you about Raghav. He came to me with a diagnosis that had already changed his life: type 2 diabetes. It was written in his medical files. There were reports, there were numbers, there was a prescription. And after a while, Raghav stopped seeing the diagnosis as something written on paper. He started seeing it as part of his identity. He believed, I am diabetic. But when Raghav gave me his complete story, something bothered me. Not the diagnosis, not the prescription, not even the numbers. It was something much smaller, something almost everyone had overlooked. I looked at the date of his diagnosis. Then I looked backward. And I asked myself one question: what was happening in Raghav's life before this diagnosis appeared? That question changed everything, because what I found wasn't where I expected to find it. And by the end of this case, even Raghav's understanding of his own story would change. Now you would be thinking, Yakub, if someone has already been diagnosed, why look backward? Because diagnosis isn't just a word. A diagnosis is a change. That a diagnosis can change the way a person thinks. It can change what they worry about. It can change what they believe every symptom means, and it can change the decision they make about their health. That's what happened to Raghav. Every time something felt different, he wondered, it is because of my diabetes. His medical life grew, his concern grew, and the diagnosis became the lens through which he looked at his entire health story. But there was a problem. Nobody had asked the question I wanted answered. Why was this diagnosis made in the first place? Think about that. How often we often spend enormous amount of attention on diagnosis, but how much attention do we give to the story that came before it? That was the real mystery in Raghav's case, because if the beginning of the story had been misunderstood, then everything that came afterward deserved a closer look. And that's when I stopped looking at Raghav's case as a diagnosis. I started looking at it as a timeline. I saw something nobody else did. I took Raghav's file and I went backward, not forward, but backward. I didn't begin with what is happening to Raghav today. I began with what happened immediately before this diagnosis. Then I went one step further, and before that, and another, and before that, I began reconstructing the story. And then I noticed something. There had been a prolonged period of intense stress around the same time the abnormal findings first appeared. At first glance, it seemed like a minor detail, but the dates caught my attention. The stress wasn't something in Raghav's history. It was sitting directly inside the timeline, and suddenly the sequence looked different, from diabetes to everything else. But the stress, to the changes, to the abnormal findings, to the medical investigation, and to the diagnosis. That was the moment I knew I had to investigate further, because the diagnosis appeared later, but the story had begun earlier. And that is something I have learned in the world of misdiagnosis. The place where an illness was recognized isn't necessarily where the story began. Raghav thought the first chapter was the diagnosis. I suspected the first chapter was somewhere else. I reconstructed the story. Raghav's misdiagnosis. So I built Raghav's misdiagnosis clarity map. On the top, I wrote what. What was Raghav actually suffering from? Then, when? When did this story truly begin? Then, how? How did it develop? Then, why? Why had this part of the story been overlooked? And finally, where? Where exactly was the hidden clue in the timeline? I started connecting the pieces. Raghav had experienced prolonged stress. Then came physiological changes. Then came abnormal findings. Then came medical evaluation. Then came the diagnosis, type 2 diabetes. But I wasn't satisfied because the timing was too important to ignore. So I went back again. I looked at the sequence. I looked at the history. I looked at what had changed and I found the clue. The clue wasn't sitting on the final page of Raghav's file. It was sitting earlier in the story. The stress. That was the part that had been hiding in plain sight. And within the world of misdiagnosis, my unique skill allowed me to see something extraordinary. The central driver of Raghav's story was stress rather than type 2 diabetes, being the complete explanation. But I didn't tell Raghav, forget your doctor. I didn't tell him, stop your treatment. And I certainly didn't tell him, trust Yakub instead. That's that isn't how I work. I wanted the story to be confirmed. So I gave Raghav a simple task. I taught him a calming breathing exercise, slowly, gently, in a controlled way. The purpose was to help him settle his stress response. Then I told him something he wasn't expecting. Now, don't take my word for it, I told him. Go back to your doctor. The assumption, Raghav went back. This time, the doctor reassessed him. The relevant evaluation was repeated, and the result no longer fit comfortably into the story Raghav had been carrying. The doctor reconsidered and changed the original diagnosis to stress, and the type 2 diabetes diagnosis was changed. But here's the part I want you to remember. Raghav came to me believing he has a disease. He left understanding something far more important. A diagnosis can become the beginning of a story people stop questioning. And in the world of misdiagnosis, I don't simply look at the label. I look at the story behind the label. Because sometimes the most important clue isn't in today's diagnosis, it is hidden in yesterday. Thank you.